New Orleans, the city of gracefully winding iron balconies, of improvised jazz melodies drifting through historic street corners. The air here always seems to carry the scent of magnolia blossoms and the rich aroma of roasted coffee. Amidst this vibrant tapestry lived a woman named Maya Sterling. 35 years old, Maya wasn't just a talented architect with iconic structures to her name. She was also a visionary urban planner, a star conductivity rising in her field. She had come to New Orleans this time to attend an important conference, a forum gathering the world's leading minds to discuss the future of sustainable cities. Maya brought not only her profound expertise, but also a heart that always yearned for community, always aspired to create better living spaces for everyone. Before immersing herself in presentations and intense discussions, Maya decided to take some time for herself. She wanted to stroll through the historic French Quarter, to truly feel the city's beauty and soul with her own feet. She chose an outfit that was elegant yet comfortable enough for an afternoon walk. A soft, jade green silk dress, effecty with low-heeled shoes, her dark hair neatly tied up, exuding a unique confidence and intellect. She wandered, admiring centuries-old buildings Europe, their paint faded by time, listening to the clatter of horse-drawn carriages on the cobblestones and the lively chatter of tourists. However, as her steps led her deeper into the city's heart, a strange feeling began to creep in. It wasn't overt hostility, not harsh words, but rather very small, very subtle ripples, yet enough for a black woman like Maya, all too familiar with society's undercurrents of prejudice, to sense that something was amiss. There were gazes that lingered a little too long from a few passers-by, looks that weren't quite curious, but seemed to carry a hint of scrutiny. There was an indescribable smirk from a souvenir vendor when she paused to look at an item, or the way a white couple, chatting animosity, suddenly fell silent as she inadvertently walked past them. These things, they were so minor they could easily be dismissed, easily rationalized as her being overly sensitive. But they were there, like a million tiny, invisible dust motes in the air. This is precisely what sociologists call microaggressions. They are the subtle, often unconscious or unintentional behaviors, words, gestures, or insinuations from the perpetrator, yet they convey negative, demeaning, or discriminatory messages towards individuals from marginalized groups, particularly based on race, gender, or sexual orientation. They are like tiny paper cuts. One might be insignificant, but thousands of small cuts accumulated over days and months can inflict deep psychological wounds, erode self-confidence, and create a persistent feeling of not truly belonging, of always having to try twice as hard to be recognized. Surely, many of us, at some point in our lives, have experienced similar feelings. Have you ever felt like you were being scrutinized more closely than others simply because of the color of your skin, even in seemingly harmless situations? Have you ever walked into a room and sensed a sudden shift in the atmosphere, an inexplicable silence, just because of your presence? That is the weight of invisible prejudices. And the lesson here is that discrimination in modern society isn't always loud and overt. It often hides beneath interactions that people consider normal, requiring us to have the sensitivity to recognize it, and sometimes the courage to speak up, or simply to protect our own emotions. Maya, despite clearly feeling those uncomfortable ripples, tried to keep her spirits unaffected. She told herself she was here for a larger purpose, for her work, for the ideas she wanted to share. She wouldn't let these small things spoil her experience. She took a deep breath, smiled, and decided to step into a small cafe on the roadside with vibrant red geraniums hanging in pots by the entrance. An iced tea with lemon, lots of ice, please, she ordered from the server. Taking the cool, refreshing glass, the ice cubes clinking cheerfully, Maya stepped back outside and found a stone bench under the shade of an old oak tree. She was just about to bring the glass to her lips to savor a moment of refreshment in the humid New Orleans afternoon, when out of the corner of her eye, she glimpsed a police patrol car slowly, very slowly, approaching her. Officer Davies, a middle-aged white man with a perpetually sour expression, emerged from the patrol car. His partner, Officer Ortega, younger and with a more reserved demeanor, remained seated inside. Davies approached Maya, his manner brusque, his tone condescending. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a little too loud, "we've had reports of a pickpocket in the area. You fit the description." Maya, though startled and immediately uneasy, maintained her composure. "Officer, I believe there must be some mistake," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I just arrived in the city a few hours ago for a conference. I was simply taking a walk." Davies didn't seem convinced. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, raked over her, from her expensive-looking dress to her designer handbag. "Is that so?" he drawled, a hint of a sneer playing on his lips. "Mind if I see some identification?" Maya, though a knot of apprehension was tightening in her stomach, reached into her purse and produced her driver's license and her conference ID badge, which clearly stated her name, her profession, and the prestigious urban planning summit she was attending. Davies took them, glanced at them dismissively, then handed them back. "Well, anyone can get a fancy badge made, can't they?" he scoffed. The implication was clear, and it stung. This, right here, is where the insidious nature of racial profiling often rears its ugly head. Racial profiling is the practice by law enforcement of targeting individuals for suspicion of crime based on their race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin, rather than on evidence-based suspicion. It's a deeply ingrained problem in many parts of America, a remnant of a long and troubled history, and a source of profound mistrust between communities of color and the police. Think about it. Would Officer Davies have approached a white woman, similarly dressed, enjoying a quiet moment on a park bench, with the same aggressive suspicion? Would he have so readily dismissed her credentials? The disparity in treatment, however subtle some might claim it to be, is often a glaring indicator of underlying bias. Maya felt a surge of indignation, but she pushed it down. She knew that escalating the situation, showing anger, could easily be twisted and used against her. This is a common and often unfair burden placed on those who find themselves in such encounters. The victim is often forced to manage not only their own legitimate feelings of frustration and fear, but also the officer's potential for misinterpretation or aggression. It's a delicate, high-stakes tightrope walk. "Officer," Maya said, her voice still even, "my identification is perfectly valid. I am a keynote speaker at the Waterfront Development Summit. You can easily verify that." Davies waved a dismissive hand. "We're busy people, ma'am. Don't have time to be calling around for every little thing." Now, how about you just let me take a look inside that bag of yours? If you've got nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem, right? The request was a clear overreach. He had no probable cause to search her belongings. Maya knew her rights. "I do not consent to a search of my bag, officer," she stated clearly. "You have no legal basis for such a request." Davies's face hardened. His jaw tightened, and a flicker of something dark, something almost predatory, flashed in his eyes. "Oh, so now we're resisting, are we?" he said, his voice dropping to a menacing grumble. "You know, ma'am, not cooperating with a police officer can lead to a whole lot of trouble. You wouldn't want that, would you?" The air crackled with tension. The casual strollers, the tourists snapping photos, they all seemed to fade into the background. It was just Maya and Officer Davies, locked in a silent battle of wills under the shade of the ancient oak. Inside the patrol car, Officer Ortega shifted uneasily in his seat. He looked out at the unfolding scene, a worried frown creasing his brow, but he said nothing. He remained a silent observer, a cog in a machine that Maya was beginning to feel was designed to grind her down. The weight of Kai Nyin of the officer, the unspoken accusation, it was heavy, suffocating. Maya took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was far from over. This was just the beginning of a confrontation that could change everything. The confrontation, initially a low hum of tension, began to draw more direct attention. A few people, sensing the shift in atmosphere, paused in their strolls. Cell phones, those ubiquitous modern-day witnesses, started to emerge from pockets and purses, their small lenses silently observing, recording. This subtle shift in audience dynamics seemed to act as an irritant to Officer Davies rather than a deterrent. His jaw clenched tighter, his gaze on Maya hardening with a defiant resolve. Maya tried one more time, her voice a carefully controlled plea for reason. "Officer, I assure you, I am not the person you are looking for. I am a professional here on legitimate business. This is a misunderstanding that can be cleared up very easily if you would just—" But Davies cut her off, his voice rising in volume, laced with impatience. "I've heard enough of your stories, ma'am. You're being uncooperative, and frankly, you're displaying a very uncooperative attitude." He took a step closer, invading her personal space, his bulk casting a shadow over her. Then came the moment that tipped the encounter from unsettling to overtly aggressive. Maya, feeling a desperate need to contact someone, to have a witness on her side, or to seek legal counsel, reached for her phone in her purse. It was a simple, almost instinctual act. But to Davies, it seemed to be a trigger. He lunged forward with surprising speed, his hand swatting at hers, trying to snatch the phone away. "What do you think you're doing?" he barked. The phone slipped from Maya's grasp, clattering onto the cobblestones. As she bent to retrieve it, Davies grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong, almost bruising. "I told you to cooperate," he seethed. In the ensuing scuffle, a brief, undignified tussle over a dropped phone, he twisted her arm. It wasn't a bone-breaking force, but it was enough to send a jolt of pain up her shoulder. And then, in what felt like a deliberate act of petty malice, a calculated move designed to humiliate, he yanked at the sleeve of her expensive silk dress. There was a sickening, tearing sound. A long, jagged rip appeared along the seam of her tailored jacket, exposing the lining beneath. It was a small act of violence, yet it felt monumental. It was a violation, not just of her clothing, but of her dignity. This is often the psychology of someone abusing power. When challenged, when they feel their authority is being questioned, especially in front of an audience, in this case, the onlookers with their recording phones, their response can be to escalate, to reassert dominance through aggression or humiliation. Officer Davies wasn't just trying to enforce the law anymore, if he ever truly was. He was trying to win, to put Maya in her place, to make her feel small and powerless. The damage wasn't just to the fabric. The invisible wounds, the psychological impact of being publicly manhandled and degraded can be far more lasting. For a woman like Maya, a respected professional, someone who had worked hard to build her career and her reputation, this public shaming was a profound assault on her sense of self. It's a tactic, whether conscious or not, designed to strip away a person's composure, their very identity, reducing them to a suspect, a problem. And what about those cell phone cameras? The presence of civilian recording has become a powerful tool for accountability in police encounters. Videos have exposed misconduct, led to investigations, and in some cases, brought about justice. But it's not without its risks. Sometimes, the act of recording can further antagonize an already aggressive officer. Yet, in many instances, it is the only impartial witness, the only record that can counter an official narrative that might otherwise go unchallenged. The onlookers in the French Quarter that day, by simply holding up their phones, were playing a crucial, if unwitting, role in the unfolding drama. The tearing of her jacket was the breaking point. Maya gasped, a mixture of pain and disbelief. The crowd murmured, a low rumble of disapproval. Officer Ortega, finally jolted into action by the overt aggression, stepped out of the patrol car. "Davies, hey, ease up," he called out, his voice tinged with alarm. But Davies, his face flushed, his breathing heavy, seemed lost in his own power trip. He was glaring at Maya, who stood there, her dress torn, her composure shattered, but a new fire of defiance kindling in her eyes. Just then, another sound cut through the tense air, the distinct wail of approaching police sirens. Captain Miller, a man known for his no-nonsense demeanor, and, as Maya would soon learn, a black man himself, was arriving on the scene. The stage was set for a new act in this unexpected New Orleans drama. The wail of the approaching sirens grew louder, a sharp, insistent sound that sliced through the charged atmosphere of the French Quarter. Heads turned. Even Officer Davies, still breathing heavily from his exertion, seemed to momentarily pause, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his flushed face. Within moments, a second patrol car pulled up, and out stepped Captain Miller. He was a tall, imposing figure, a black man in his late 50s, his uniform immaculate, his expression stern and unreadable as he surveyed the scene. Maya, visibly shaken, her designer jacket ripped. Davies, still posturing aggressively. Ortega, looking increasingly uncomfortable. And the small crowd of onlookers, their phones still raised. Captain Miller wasted no time. His gaze, sharp and assessing, moved from Maya to Davies. "Officer Davies," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable authority that cut through the lingering tension. What in the Sam Hill is going on here? Davies, attempting to regain his composure, straightened up and launched into his defense. "Captain," he began, his tone attempting to convey a sense of professional control. This woman was acting suspiciously. Matched the description of a pickpocket. She became uncooperative, resisted my attempts to investigate. He gestured vaguely towards Maya, as if her torn clothing was somehow proof of her supposed aggression. But Captain Miller was not easily swayed. His eyes narrowed slightly as he listened to Davies's account, then turned to Maya. "Ma'am," he said, his tone respectful, a stark contrast to Davies's earlier belligerence. "Would you care to tell me your side of what happened?" Maya, though her heart was still pounding and a tremor ran through her hands, took a deep breath. She looked directly at Captain Miller, her voice trembling slightly at first, but gaining strength as she spoke. She recounted the events clearly and concisely, her peaceful walk, Davies's unprovoked stop, his dismissive attitude towards her identification, his demand to search her bag without cause, and finally, the aggressive physical altercation and the deliberate tearing of her jacket. She pointed to the onlookers. "These people saw what happened, Captain. Some of them were recording." As Maya spoke, Captain Miller's expression remained impassive, but there was an intensity in his gaze that suggested he was taking in every detail. He then turned to Officer Ortega. "Officer Ortega, what did you observe?" Ortega hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting towards Davies, then back to the captain. He swallowed. "Well, sir," he began, his voice low, "things did get a little escalated. The lady, Miss Sterling, she was trying to explain who she was. Officer Davies. He seemed to think she wasn't being truthful." While not a full condemnation of his partner, Ortega's reluctance to fully back Davies's story was telling. The power of an impartial leader, someone willing to listen to all sides and assess a situation based on facts rather than preconceived notions or blind loyalty, cannot be overstated. In a system where the blue wall of silence, the unwritten rule among police officers not to report on a colleague's errors or misconduct, can often obstruct justice, a leader like Captain Miller, who appeared willing to look beyond that, was a rarity, a potential game changer. The videos from the onlookers began to circulate almost immediately. The raw, unedited footage painted a stark picture, one that largely corroborated Maya's account and cast serious doubt on Davies's claims of her being uncooperative or resisting. The speed of social media, its ability to disseminate information, and potential evidence far and wide was already at play. This public scrutiny, this undeniable visual record, added another layer of pressure to the situation. It was no longer just Maya's word against an officer's. Captain Miller, a veteran officer with decades of experience, had seen his share of misconduct. He recognized the telltale signs of an officer who had let his biases and temper get the better of him. After a few more pointed questions to Davies, whose responses were becoming increasingly defensive and less coherent, Captain Miller made his decision. "Officer Davies," he announced, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument, "you are to stand down immediately. I want your badge and your service weapon. You are suspended, pending a full internal investigation into this incident." He then turned to Maya. "Ms. Sterling, I sincerely apologize for the treatment you have received. This is not how the New Orleans Police Department conducts itself. We will look into this matter thoroughly. A small gasp went through the crowd. Davies looked stunned, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. For Maya, it was a small, fragile sliver of justice, a tiny beacon of hope in a situation that had rapidly spiraled out of control. Davies was being held accountable, at least for now. But as she watched him reluctantly hand over his badge, a deeper unease settled in. She knew, instinctively, that this was likely not an isolated incident. An officer who behaved with such impunity in broad daylight, in front of witnesses, was probably not acting alone, or for the first time. The suspension was a start, but the real fight, the fight against the system that allowed such behavior to fester, was only just beginning. And the question lingered: would an internal investigation truly be impartial, or would the system find a way to protect its own? The immediate aftermath of Officer Davies' suspension brought a temporary sense of relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by a gnawing unease. As Captain Miller arranged for Maya to be escorted back to her hotel, offering assurances of a thorough investigation, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this was merely the visible tip of a much larger, much uglier iceberg. The way Davies had acted, with such brazen confidence, suggested a pattern, a sense of immunity that rarely develops in a vacuum. Back in the relative quiet of her hotel room, the adrenaline began to wear off, replaced by a mixture of exhaustion, anger, and a steely resolve. The torn jacket lay on the bed, a tangible symbol of the violation she had endured. But Maya Sterling was not one to be easily intimidated or silenced. She immediately contacted a well-respected New Orleans civil rights attorney, a woman known for her tenacity in taking on cases of police misconduct. The decision to seek legal counsel wasn't just about seeking damages for a ruined jacket or a bruised arm. It was about accountability, about ensuring that what happened to her wouldn't happen to someone else. News of the incident, fueled by the viral videos, spread like wildfire. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages. Colleagues from the conference offered support, expressing their shock and outrage. Friends and family from back home called, worried for her safety. But alongside the messages of solidarity, a different kind of communication began to trickle in. Anonymous calls, with no one on the other end, just a heavy silence that felt more menacing than any threat. Vague, unsettling comments on the social media posts sharing the video, hinting that she didn't know who she was messing with. The pressure was subtle at first, designed to create an atmosphere of intimidation, to make her second-guess her decision to pursue the matter. These are common tactics employed by those who wish to protect a corrupt system. They often start with psychological warfare, attempting to wear down a victim's resolve before resorting to more overt measures. The goal is to make the fight so unpleasant, so draining, that the person simply gives up. Maya discussed these developments with her attorney, who, unfortunately, was not surprised. "This is how they operate, Maya," the attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Dubois, explained. "They try to make you feel isolated, paranoid. They want you to believe you're up against an invisible, all-powerful enemy." The true, chilling confirmation of these undercurrents of intimidation came later that evening. Maya had dinner in her room, trying to process the day's events and strategize with Ms. Dubois over the phone. After the call, she decided to take a bath, hoping to soothe her frayed nerves. When she returned to the bedroom, something was immediately, terribly wrong. The room wasn't ransacked in a violent, obvious way. Instead, it was a more insidious kind of violation. Drawers were slightly ajar. Papers on the desk had been subtly shifted. Her suitcase, though closed, felt like it had been rifled through. It was the work of someone trying to send a message, someone who wanted her to know they could get to her, even in the presumed safety of her locked hotel room. Then she saw it, scrawled across the bathroom mirror, in a smear of what looked disturbingly like her own red lipstick, were two stark words: "Be quiet." A cold dread seeped into Maya's bones, far more chilling than the earlier confrontation with Davies. This was different. This was calculated. This was a direct personal threat. The bravado of Officer Davies on the street was one thing. This silent, shadowy intrusion into her private space was something else entirely. It spoke of a coordinated effort, of people who operated in the darkness, people who were clearly not happy that she was refusing to let the incident fade away. The mistake the perpetrators made, however, was in underestimating Maya Sterling. Such tactics, designed to cower most people into submission, had the opposite effect on her. The fear was real, a visceral knot in her stomach, but it was quickly being consumed by a white-hot anger, a fierce determination not to be silenced, not to be broken. This act of intimidation didn't just solidify her resolve to fight for herself. It broadened her understanding of what she was up against. This wasn't just about one rogue cop anymore. This was about a system, a network, that was actively trying to protect itself by crushing anyone who dared to expose its rot. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her phone, not with fear alone, but with a burgeoning fury. She didn't call hotel security first. She called Captain Miller. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and steady, belying the storm raging inside her. "Captain," she said, "they've been in my room. They left me a message." The fight had just become a whole lot more dangerous. Captain Miller's voice, on the other end of the line, was grim. The news of the intrusion into Maya's hotel room, the chilling message left on the mirror, confirmed his own growing suspicions. This was no longer just about Officer Davies' misconduct. It was clear that deeper, more shadowy forces were at play, forces intent on silencing Maya and protecting a rotten core within the city's power structure. He arrived at her hotel within minutes, his face etched with concern and a quiet fury. He surveyed the subtly disturbed room, his experienced eyes missing nothing. "Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice low and serious after he'd assessed the scene, "I need to be frank with you. What you're dealing with here, it's bigger than one bad apple. Davies is a symptom, not the disease." He paused, then continued, "There have been rumors, whispers, for years, about a network within the department, influential figures in the city who protect their own, who make problems disappear. I've tried to get to the bottom of it, but it's like punching smoke. They're too well insulated." He looked directly at Maya. "I suspect Deputy Chief Thompson might be a key player in this. He's powerful, connected, and he doesn't like outsiders rocking the boat." This candid admission from a high-ranking police officer was both validating and terrifying for Maya. It confirmed her instincts, but also starkly illuminated the danger she was in. Captain Miller, despite his rank and his desire for reform, was himself constrained by the very system he was a part of. He couldn't openly defy it without risking his own career, perhaps more. But he could offer guidance, a sliver of hope in the encroaching darkness. "There's someone," Miller continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "A man named Peterson. He's a longtime city archivist, works down at the municipal records. He's disgruntled, seen too much over the years. He's hinted to me a few times, very discreetly, that he knows where some of the city's skeletons are buried, so to speak. He's scared, and rightly so. But if anyone knows about a paper trail, about evidence of these cover-ups, it would be him." Armed with this fragile lead, Maya and her attorney, Miss Dubois, decided to approach Mr. Peterson. Finding him wasn't difficult. Locating his small, cluttered office in the labyrinthine basement of the City Hall archives was another matter. When they finally did, they found a small, nervous man in his late 60s, with thinning gray hair and eyes that darted around as if constantly expecting trouble. Initially, Mr. Peterson was terrified. The moment Maya introduced herself and explained why she was there, his face paled. No, I can't," he stammered, wringing his hands. "You don't understand what these people are capable of. Thompson, he has eyes and ears everywhere. My pension, my family." This is the chilling reality for many whistleblowers. The personal risks are immense. They often face ostracization, job loss, harassment, and even physical threats. It takes extraordinary courage to step forward when you know the system you're challenging has the power to destroy your life. Maya didn't pressure him. Instead, she spoke from the heart. She shared her own experience, the fear she felt, but also her unshakable conviction that things had to change. She spoke not just of her own case, but of the countless others who might have suffered in silence, whose stories were buried in the very archives Mr. Peterson oversaw. She painted a picture of a New Orleans that could be better, safer, more just, if only people like him, people who held the keys to the truth, were brave enough to unlock it. Ms. Dubois, meanwhile, calmly outlined the legal protections that could be afforded to him as a whistleblower, emphasizing that they would do everything in their power to ensure his safety. It was a slow, painstaking process of building trust. Maya visited him again, not to push, but just to talk, to let him see her as a person, not just a headline. She listened to his concerns, his fears, and gradually, something shifted in Mr. Peterson. Perhaps it was Maya's quiet determination. Perhaps it was the weight of his own conscience after years of witnessing injustice. Or perhaps it was the glimmer of hope that, this time, things might actually change. Finally, during their third meeting, Mr. Peterson made his decision. His hand still trembled, but his voice was firm. "All right," he said, taking a deep breath. "All right, I'll help you." He then revealed the existence of what he called the Shadow Ledger, not a physical book, but a series of meticulously kept, off-the-record files detailing internal complaints against certain officers, complaints that had been systematically buried, often with notes or signatures implicating higher-ups, including Deputy Chief Thompson. These files weren't stored with regular records. They were kept in a decommissioned, climate-controlled vault in a rarely visited section of the archives, a place few even knew existed. He drew a crude map on a napkin, marking the location, and gave them a sequence of numbers, an old access code he believed might still work. "This is incredibly dangerous," he warned, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resolve. Thompson's people. They watch these archives more closely than you'd think. If you go in there, you might not come out the same. Maya and Miss Dubois exchanged a look. The stakes were higher than ever, but now they had a target, a tangible piece of evidence that could blow the whole corrupt system wide open. The question was, were they willing to take the ultimate risk to retrieve it? The decision to retrieve the shadow ledger was not made lightly. Maya, Ms. Dubois, and a trusted private investigator Ms. Dubois had worked with on sensitive cases. A former federal agent named Marcus spent 2 days meticulously planning their entry into the City Hall archives. The risks were immense. If caught, they could face serious criminal charges, not to mention the very real danger posed by Deputy Chief Thompson and his network if they felt truly threatened. Captain Miller, while unable to offer direct assistance that could compromise his position, provided invaluable, albeit discreet, intelligence about the building's overnight security routines and potential blind spots in surveillance. He was walking a tightrope, deeply conflicted, but determined to see some measure of justice prevail. Officer Ortega, too, played a small but crucial role. Racked with guilt over his initial inaction during the incident with Maya, and now increasingly disillusioned with the corruption he was beginning to see more clearly, he agreed to create a minor, credible diversion, a falsified report of a suspicious vehicle on the opposite side of the City Hall complex, timed precisely to draw away at least one of the overnight security patrols. The night of the planned entry was thick with the humid New Orleans air, the distant sounds of late-night revelry from the French Quarter, a stark contrast to the tense silence in the car as Maya, Ms. Dubois, and Marcus approached City Hall. They chose the darkest hours, a little after 2 a.m., when the city was at its quietest and security patrols were hopefully at their most complacent. Dressed in dark, inconspicuous clothing, they moved like shadows, Marcus leading the way, his movements economical and precise, a testament to his years of experience. Gaining access to the archive's basement was the first hurdle. Thanks to Captain Miller's information about a service entrance with an older, less sophisticated alarm system, Marcus was able to bypass it with relative ease. The silence inside the vast, dimly lit corridors of City Hall was oppressive, broken only by the hum of ancient HVAC systems and the distant echo of their own soft footsteps. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of paper sounded deafening. Mr. Peterson's hand-drawn map, though crude, proved accurate. They navigated through a maze of towering shelves laden with dusty tomes and forgotten records, the air thick with the smell of old paper and neglect. The decommissioned vault Mr. Peterson had described was tucked away in a far corner, its heavy steel door looking like something from a bygone era. The numeric keypad next to it seemed almost laughably outdated. Marcus carefully punched in the code Mr. Peterson had provided. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click and a low groan of protesting metal, the heavy door unlatched. Inside, it was even colder than the rest of the basement, the air still and dry. Rows of anonymous-looking filing cabinets lined the walls. Following Mr. Peterson's further, more specific instructions, Maya located the designated cabinet. Her hands, surprisingly steady, pulled open the drawer. And there they were. Not one ledger, but several thick, meticulously organized folders, bound with string, their manila covers yellowed with age. The shadow ledger. Ms. Dubois, ever the pragmatist, quickly began to photograph key documents with a high-resolution portable scanner, while Maya and Marcus carefully transferred the original files into a secure, reinforced briefcase. They worked with a quiet urgency, acutely aware that their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Just as they were securing the last of the files, a sound from the corridor outside the vault sent a jolt of ice through Maya's veins. The unmistakable click of a door opening, followed by heavy footsteps and low, indistinct voices. They weren't alone. Marcus motioned for silence, his eyes darting towards the vault door, which they had thankfully left slightly ajar. He peered through the narrow opening. His expression, when he turned back, was grim. "Thompson," he mouthed silently, "and at least 3 others, armed." It seemed their diversion hadn't been enough. Or perhaps Thompson had his own, more reliable, sources of information. They were trapped. The vault offered no other exit. The air grew thick with unspoken fear. Maya clutched the briefcase containing the files to her chest. This was it, the culmination of all their risks, all their planning, and it looked as though it was about to end in disaster. Deputy Chief Thompson, the man who represented the very corruption they were trying to expose, was just outside the door, and he knew they were there. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable, before the heavy vault door was suddenly, violently thrown open. The heavy vault door creaked open with a groan that seemed to echo the dread in Maya's heart, revealing Deputy Chief Thompson and 3 uniformed officers. Thompson, a burly man with a florid face and eyes like chips of cold steel, surveyed the scene with a predatory smirk. He held a high-powered flashlight, its beam cutting through the dimness of the vault, landing squarely on Maya, Ms. Dubois, and Marcus. The officers fanned out behind him, their hands resting ominously on their holstered weapons. "Well, well, well," Thompson drawled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look what we have here. A little late-night reading, Miss Sterling? Or perhaps just some good old-fashioned breaking and entering?" He took a step into the vault, his presence filling the confined space, making the air feel even heavier. "I must say, I'm disappointed. I expected more subtlety from a renowned architect." Marcus stepped slightly in front of Maya and Ms. Dubois, a protective, if ultimately futile, gesture. "We're here legally, Thompson," he stated, his voice calm despite the circumstances. "We have reason to believe these archives contain evidence vital to an ongoing investigation." Thompson let out a harsh laugh. "Ongoing investigation? The only investigation going on right now is into how you 3 are going to explain trespassing in a secured city facility after hours. And as for vital evidence," he gestured towards the briefcase Maya was clutching, "I think you'll find that anything in here is simply misplaced and soon to be properly refiled." The threat was unmistakable. Miss Dubois, ever the composed professional, spoke up. "Deputy Chief, your attempts at intimidation are duly noted, but they are also being recorded. We have taken precautions." She discreetly tapped the small recording device disguised as a pen in her pocket. Thompson's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned. uglier than before. Precautions? You think your little toys scare me? This city, Ms. Dubois, understands loyalty. It understands order. What it doesn't understand is outsiders meddling where they don't belong. He nodded to his officers. Secure them, and secure that briefcase. The officers began to advance. Marcus tensed, preparing for a confrontation he knew they couldn't win. Maya tightened her grip on the briefcase, her mind racing. This couldn't be how it ended. All that risk, all that hope, about to be snuffed out in a dusty, forgotten vault. And then, just as the officers were about to reach them, another sound pierced the tense silence. A sound that was, at that moment, the most beautiful sound Maya had ever heard. The unmistakable rising wail of multiple sirens, growing rapidly closer, converging on City Hall from all directions. This wasn't just a local patrol. This was something bigger. Thompson froze. His head whipped towards the vault door, his face a mask of disbelief, then dawning fury. What in the... The sound of heavy boots pounding down the corridor outside. The authoritative shouts of FBI, open up, federal agents, confirmed it. Ms. Dubois, it turned out, had taken a far greater precaution than just a recording device. Anticipating the possibility of a direct confrontation with Thompson or his loyalists, and knowing the limitations of local law enforcement in such a compromised situation, she had discreetly alerted a contact within the FBI's Public Integrity Section earlier that day, outlining their plan and the potential for obstruction of justice. It was a long shot, a contingency plan she hoped they wouldn't need. But now, it was their lifeline. The vault door, still ajar, was pushed open further, revealing not just more local police, but a phalanx of stern-faced FBI agents in tactical gear, their weapons drawn, their presence an immediate and overwhelming shift in the balance of power. The lead agent, a tall, no-nonsense woman with an air of absolute authority, stepped forward. "Deputy Chief Thompson," she announced, her voice ringing with command, "you and your men are to stand down. You are interfering with a federal investigation." Thompson looked like a cornered animal. His face, moments before a mask of arrogant power, was now contorted with a mixture of rage and dawning panic. The shadow ledger, the physical evidence of years of corruption, lay in the briefcase in Maya's hands, and now the federal government was literally at the door. The standoff was brief. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, Thompson and his officers had no choice but to comply. They were disarmed and placed in handcuffs, their shocked, indignant protests drowned out by the calm, professional efficiency of the federal agents. As Thompson was led away, his eyes met Maya's for a fleeting moment. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. But Maya met his gaze steadily, the briefcase still clutched tightly. She had faced him down, and she had won this crucial battle. Captain Miller arrived shortly after, looking both relieved and profoundly weary. He had clearly been alerted by the FBI. He nodded at Maya, a silent acknowledgement of her courage and the incredible risk she had taken. Officer Ortega was there too, looking pale but resolute, having provided his own testimony to the arriving federal agents about what he knew. The shadow ledger was carefully taken into federal custody. Each folder, each page, a potential nail in the coffin of a deeply entrenched system of corruption. As Maya, Ms. Dubois, and Marcus finally stepped out of the oppressive confines of the City Hall archives and into the pre-dawn light, a new day was breaking over New Orleans. It felt symbolic. The storm had been weathered, the immediate threat neutralized. Justice, which had seemed so elusive, so fragile, now felt like a tangible possibility. But Maya knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that while this was a monumental victory, the war to truly cleanse the city and reform its institutions was far from over. This was just the end of the beginning. The raid on the City Hall archives and the arrest of Deputy Chief Thompson sent shockwaves not just through New Orleans but across the nation. The Shadow Ledger, once a carefully guarded secret, became the cornerstone of a sprawling federal investigation that promised to unravel years, possibly decades, of corruption, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice within the city's police department and municipal government. Headlines blared, news anchors spoke in grave tones, and the citizens of New Orleans watched, a mixture of hope and cynicism warring within them. They had seen promises of reform before. Maya Sterling, however, did not retreat into the background. She didn't pack her bags and return to her comfortable life, her successful career waiting for her. The events of the past week had changed her irrevocably. The fear she had felt, the violation, the anger, it had all coalesced into a profound sense of purpose. She had seen the rot at the heart of the system, and she could not simply walk away. With the full backing of national civil rights organizations and the considerable resources she herself commanded, Maya established the Sterling Fund for Community Justice. It wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a tangible, operational entity designed to provide pro bono legal representation for victims of police misconduct and systemic injustice in New Orleans. It aimed to fund community oversight programs, to advocate for policy changes, and to educate citizens about their rights. The architect who designed buildings now found herself designing a new framework for justice. Her story resonated deeply. People from all walks of life in New Orleans, particularly from marginalized communities who had long borne the brunt of police abuse, saw in Maya a champion, someone who had the courage and the means to fight a battle they had long felt was unwinnable. Volunteers flocked to the Sterling Fund, young activists, retired lawyers, concerned parents, even some disillusioned former police officers. Community centers opened their doors for meetings. Local businesses offered support. A city that had felt fractured and powerless began to find a unified voice. Captain Miller, in the wake of Thompson's arrest and the unfolding federal probe, was appointed as the interim chief of police. It was a daunting task, cleaning out a department so deeply mired in corruption. But he embraced it with a grim determination, publicly vowing to implement sweeping reforms and rebuild trust between the police and the community. He knew it would be an uphill battle, but he also knew he wasn't alone anymore. Officer Ortega, who had bravely provided crucial testimony, became an advocate for change from within the ranks, a symbol for younger officers that integrity was not a liability. The legal battles were long and arduous. Thompson and his cohorts employed high-powered defense attorneys, attempting every legal maneuver to discredit the evidence and attack Maya's credibility. But the contents of the Shadow Ledger, combined with the testimony of whistleblowers like Mr. Peterson and the irrefutable evidence gathered by the FBI proved overwhelming. One by one, indictments were handed down, convictions secured. The system, slowly, painfully, began to hold its own accountable. Maya Sterling became more than just a headline. She became a presence in New Orleans. She attended community meetings, not as a distant benefactor, but as a partner. She listened to stories, shared her own, and worked tirelessly alongside local leaders to build something new, something better, from the ashes of the old. She learned that true change doesn't come from grand pronouncements, but from the painstaking, day-by-day work of building bridges, empowering voices, and holding power accountable. Her journey reminds us that one individual, armed with courage, conviction, and a refusal to be silenced, can indeed spark a revolution. It doesn't require a superhero cape, just an unwavering belief in what is right. Maya Sterling came to New Orleans as an architect, a visitor. She left an indelible mark, not just on its skyline, but on its soul. She showed a city, and indeed a nation, that even the most entrenched systems of injustice can be challenged, can be changed. The fight for justice is never truly over. It's a constant vigilance, a continuous effort passed from one generation to the next. But stories like Maya's light the way. They remind us of the power we all hold within us. If Maya's story has moved you, if it has sparked something within you, please consider sharing it. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. Your engagement helps us bring these important narratives to a wider audience. And as you go about your day, perhaps ask yourself this one question, a question that Maya Sterling, in her own quiet way, forced an entire city to confront. If the people sworn to protect you are the ones you need protection from, where do you even begin to run?